Hello, good afternoon. This is Caitlin Coleman, Water Education Colorado's editor of Headwaters Magazine. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on climate change and mitigation in Colorado water. The webinar complements and expands on the content in our spring issue of Headwaters, which, there it is, which is also focused on climate change and water. You can find the issue and learn more about us at watereducationcolorado.org. A couple of notes before we get started. The webinar will last for 1 hour. As attendees, you'll be muted throughout the whole presentation, but if you have questions, just type them into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be on the side of your screen. We're aiming to leave something around 15 minutes at the end for our panelists to respond to your questions. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded. I'll email you a link next week and we'll post it on our website in about a month or so you guys get the first look at the recording. And that is all, so let's get started. Climate change is projected to impact water supplies in Colorado's future with possible changes in precipitation, retimed runoff flows, extreme precipitation and drought events, water quality impacts, and much more. In this spring issue of our magazine, we explored the many innovative measures that water providers and water users are taking to adapt. But is the water sector doing enough to mitigate and curb the effects of climate change? Today, we'll hear from our 4 expert panelists about climate change and water projections for Colorado, mitigation efforts and state policy, and at the wastewater and water provider level. So let me introduce our speakers. We'll hear from, in this order, Brad Udall at CSU, Taryn Finnessey with the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, Curt Carson with the City of Grand Junction, and Laurna Kaatz with Denver Water. We'll start with some science and projections from Brad Udall. Brad is a senior water and climate research scientist and scholar at CSU's Colorado Water Institute. His expertise includes climate change, hydrology, and related policy issues in the American West. He's a contributing author to the 4th National Climate Assessment, which was released in November, and various other national and international reports. So Brad, let me share your screen.
So thanks, Caitlin, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Caitlin asked me to do a brief look at projections for Colorado and why mitigation matters. And for those of you who are living in the mountains and might think that a new ice age is upon us, I just want to let you know that climate change has not been called off. Here's a look at May 2019 around the world, and there are plenty of those dark red areas that are record warmest and many of the much warmer than average areas over the globe. You can see a few blue blobs, including the one that we've been experiencing here in Colorado and the Midwest US has also been experiencing. And if you want to know how 2019 rates so far, it's the 3rd warmest January through May. And there in the middle bottom of the screen, again, you can see that blue bob over the center of the US, which indicates this cold, wet weather we've been having. I'll remind everyone of what happened last year, too. 2018 was record warm and record dry in large parts of the Southwest, including the Four Corners area with respect to precipitation, and including almost all of Arizona and a good portion of western Colorado and a huge chunk of New Mexico with regard to warmest temperatures. I'm going to bet most of you are familiar with climate change in Colorado, and I just thought I'd quickly go through some of the figures in that document. So these are ensemble projections for the future for the western US here. And on the left, you can see all projections for temperature mid-century using a mid-range greenhouse gas emission scenario. You can also see the warmest 20% and the coolest 20%. And these temperatures, annual temperatures, mid-century look anywhere from 4 to 6 Fahrenheit higher, which is a doubling to a tripling of what we've already experienced. The report mentions that if Denver warms up by 2 Fahrenheit, it becomes like Pueblo, 4 Fahrenheit like Lamar, and 6 Fahrenheit like Albuquerque. With regard to precipitation, the models are frustratingly poor. And you can see that line that traces through the middle part or the lower part of Colorado where it transitions from wet to dry. And frankly, we just don't know enough to give you good projections on this. Where that hinge point, wet dry hinge point occurs, I will tell you, or I think ultimately will end up proving to be pretty darn important for Colorado. In the wettest 20% of models there, you can see much of the state gets wetter. In the drier 20%, you can see much of the state gets drier. I'll note, as I've always said, though, precipitation's not runoff, right? There's a whole bunch of environmental processes that effectively add a tax onto any precipitation. And so additional precipitation may, in fact, not turn into additional runoff. So here's a look at Southwest Colorado, and the report pulls out Southwest Colorado. This is mostly appropriate for the whole state, I'd argue, and it's just nice because it shows you what might happen month to month. The 20th century range there are in the purple dashed lines, and if you look at precipitation here, every one of those bars looks like it's within natural variability. That's the take-home point. With regard to temperature projections, though, if you look again at the purple dashed lines, the 20th century range, these monthly numbers are all outside of it. And again, this is a doubling or tripling of existing warming from what we have seen, including, you can see temperatures that are 6 Fahrenheit warmer than what we've experienced in the past. These are some mid-century streamfall projections for Colorado River. And the one thing I would argue here is that the further south, the greater the decline. And I think I would rephrase this just in terms of risk. The further south, the greater the risk of a decline in future runoff. I know Reclamation is actually working on some new projections, and they should be out later this year. I'm sure you're all aware of this idea of how the hydrograph will shift in the future. It'll occur earlier. And in the bottom here, you can see where March, April, and May show increases in flow, and then the rest of the year, July or June all the way out into the fall, these declines. So why does mitigation matter? So people that handicap the Paris commitments right now tell us we're on a 3.5 Celsius warming path right now. 3.5 Celsius is really bad. All kinds of negative impacts, including, frankly, just the ability to feed ourselves planet-wide. Water is certainly a part of that, but when you talk through 3.5 Celsius, you got to look at everything else. I'll note that we really shouldn't necessarily focus on the warming target, because what we need to do to get these temperatures down is to focus on net zero emissions as soon as possible. That's the challenge, net zero emissions. Net zero because some emissions we're actually not going to be able to reduce, and so we're going to have to offset them. You know, for years, climate scientists have dealt with a community that we call deniers, but now there's a new community out there called doomers. And the doomers say, you know, why bother? We accept the science, we're all doomed. And the answer to this is there's no climate cliff. Every 0.1 Celsius that we can stop matters. And if you look hard enough, there are all kinds of great science out there. We have the technology and policy tools for many of the solutions we need. The first steps we need to do are much easier than the later ones. This is a big mountain decline, and the bottom of this mountain is really flat and level, and we can run and even jog. So there's a bunch of stuff we can do right now that's easy and should be done. And I'll note we have decades to fix this problem, but we need to get serious now, and now means right now. Our nation and the world needs leaders and examples. I would argue we have the knowledge and the talent and the resources to lead. And if that isn't enough of a challenge, I'll tell you there are large co-benefits: cleaner air and water, more livable cities and towns from the actions we need to take. And finally, personally, I'd argue it's our responsibility to lead. So closing thoughts. There's March 2017, 9 Fahrenheit, warmer than average. So warmest March in Colorado history. Climate change is here. We know it's impacting temps, maybe precip. These impacts will get worse. New normal's the wrong word, because what we're seeing is going to continue to change. Plan on hotter everywhere, shifting runoff patterns with the south likely drying, perhaps the north wetting, earlier within year runoff, more weather variability from year to year and within year. And you can just look at this year versus last year. There's a flow reduction risk in many of our rivers. We're also going to have flood risk, higher water temperatures, and I haven't talked much about it, but fires are something we're going to live with. And in my opportunity to be an optimist, or my desire to be an optimist, this gives us an opportunity to change. So with that, I'll end, Caitlin, and turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Brad. So next we'll hear from Taryn. So Taryn Finnessey is the Senior Climate Change Specialist for the state of Colorado, where she's housed within DNR. She's responsible for implementing House Bill 13-1293 and works across state agencies to integrate scientific and policy innovations that increase Colorado's ability to address climate change impacts and reduce emissions. She's also responsible for compliance with the Colorado Drought Mitigation and Response Plan. So, Taryn?
Thank you, Caitlin. So I am not going to cover the science, since Brad just did a great job talking about the science, and I'm going to jump right into the latter parts of the title, the mitigation and also Colorado water. So Governor Polis has made a commitment since he was on the campaign trail to 100% renewable energy by 2040. He feels that this goal is motivated both by the moral imperative to fight climate change and address our air quality issues, as well as seeing it as an opportunity to drive innovation and protect Colorado's way of life while creating high-paying jobs. And so we have been moving forward in implementation and execution of this. And by 100% renewable energy by 2040, Governor Polis does mean the electrification of the grid and moving more towards renewable or clean energy sources, but he also means broader electrification within the clean energy economy. So moving towards cleaner transportation, looking at buildings. So it's more comprehensive than just looking at the electric sector. So in a first step to figure out, well, how are we going to actually achieve this bold and ambitious 100% renewable energy goal, we recently came out with the roadmap to 100% renewable energy, which outlines some of the key tenets and components that we're going to be doing a deep dive into. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive roadmap, but more of a framework on how we are getting there. So it covers some of the major areas and sets forth some of the big, broader topics on what we're pursuing, but it doesn't necessarily outline any specific proposal or policy or program that we're moving forward. But you can see here that what we are talking about goes beyond just the electric sector and really looks at how we are utilizing energy in all facets economy-wide. In addition to Governor Polis's own initiatives with the roadmap and his 100% renewable commitment, we also had a rather historic 2019 legislative session with regard to clean energy and climate. The list of bills you see here is actually only the ones that directly relate to climate and utility policy, not the ones that also relate to clean energy. The summary of 2019 legislation can be found on the Colorado Energy Office's webpage, and it's about 3 pages of different bills that all have some nexus to clean energy and climate change. But I'm just highlighting here some of the specific climate and utility policy bills that were passed. A number of these will have to go through a rulemaking process through the Air Quality Control Commission, which is housed within the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. Some of these are already underway. Some of them have varying deadlines. Senate Bill 96 has a deadline of just next summer. so that is already kind of underway as far as how we're going to move forward with implementing that. But 181 also has some rulemaking components, as do some of these other bills. At the same time, we are looking at the just transition and how can we move away from coal-based electrical production to cleaner energy sources without necessarily negatively impacting the communities that have historically relied on traditional energy sources. And so within the Department of Labor and Employment, there's actually a new office being stood up looking solely at just transition and kind of comprehensively addressing some of the challenges through economic development and employment. So we're trying to take a really comprehensive and cohesive approach to how we address climate change. I'm not going to dive into into more of this because that could be an hour webinar in and of itself. But if you have questions about the components of these legislation, please feel free to reach out. One other mitigation action that I want to mention is the move to zero emission vehicles. At the end of the Hickenlooper administration, the AQCC, the Air Quality Control Commission at CDPHE, adopted low emission vehicle standards. We have the authority to do this under the Clean Air Act and the 177 waiver that California has. Because we have areas of non-attainment, meaning that areas of our state do not meet EPA air quality guidelines, and so we passed some rulemakings that encourage the adoption of low-emission vehicles. Governor Polis issued his very first executive order on zero-emission vehicles, and so it would build on that low-emission vehicle rule and move towards zero emission vehicles. So these would be full electric vehicles, and then obviously being charged by renewable sources. We are putting forth a lot of resources to help achieve this goal of 940,000 zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030. The rulemaking process is already underway at AQCC, and we have also contracted to have charging stations roughly every 50 miles on all the major corridors within the state of Colorado. And then part of the legislation that happened that I mentioned on the previous page with the PUC would also make it easier for utilities to invest in electric vehicle infrastructure. So that's what we're doing on the mitigation side. When it comes to water, we're looking more at adaptation and resilience than we are on mitigation. There are certainly some individual systems that have to pump water or that have groundwater that do have energy requirements associated with it. But in general, the state of Colorado, our water system is not as energy intensive as other water systems that exist across the West. So when we talk about climate change with regard to water, much of what we're talking about is how do we make sure that we have enough water given changes in temperature and precipitation that Brad talked about. So those of you who have heard me talk about this at anything ever, at least in the last 5 years, have probably seen this slide. The water plan that was developed just a couple of years ago, which relies on scenario planning, has 5 different scenarios for plausible futures at 2050, but 3 of those 5 scenarios rely on a warmer climate, and what that looks like is different depending on where you are in the state. The 2 scenarios are defined as hot and dry, or between 20th century observed and hot and dry, which we've shortened to the in-between scenario because it's too onerous to say the whole thing. We've gotten a lot of questions since we came out with these scenarios as to, well, what does this mean with regard to temperature change and precipitation change? That's kind of a hard question to answer because as it gets warmer, sometimes we actually see increases in precipitation, but that's not necessarily dispersed evenly across the seasons. But roughly, what this means is the hot and dry scenario is about a 2.3 degree increase in temperature, and the in-between is about 2.1. And I'll note that neither of those really fall under that 2-degree international standard that Brad mentioned, let alone the 1.5. And it also really varies as to where you are in the state as to what that looks like. Colorado is a very geographically and topographically diverse state. So for the in-between scenario, we're actually developing tools right now. This is the beta version of the story map that we've recently developed as part of the technical update, where individual basins can actually go into the tool and look at what the temperature offsets look like for their individual basins. We actually go down to the HUC 10 level, so we provide a lot of detail, but you can tell that what that temperature change looks like varies. And the reason we're focusing on temperature instead of precipitation is because we're a lot more confident with temperature than we are with precipitation, and in many areas that temperature change is driving much of the water availability, not because of increased evaporation or demand. And then with the hot and dry scenario, you can see that obviously those temperatures increase, but again, how it looks across the state is different. So what does that mean as far as projected flows or water in the river? Well, it means for some of our most heavily appropriated river basins, like the Arkansas South Platte and the Rio Grande, that for the two scenarios where we have perturbed the climate, there is not sufficient water to meet existing needs, let alone future needs at 2050. And so I will say that this doesn't necessarily mean dry river conditions. Oftentimes there's senior water users that are downstream that are going to pull water through, but it does mean that there's a gap between what we see as projected flows in the future and what the demand is. And I also want to stress that there is a difference with seasonality as far as what this looks like, and that the changes in precipitation are not necessarily equally distributed across the entire year. I also quickly want to mention that it's not just in long-term water resource planning that we're incorporating climate change. The Division of Water Resources is actually incorporating climate change into dam safety rules, and this is because a warmer atmosphere can hold more water. And so events like the 2013 floods are something that we would anticipate or expect to see in the future as a result of the ability for the atmosphere to hold more moisture. And so we've done an analysis on what that probable maximum precipitation could look like and what it might mean for dam safety. And we are currently we are in the process of proposing a new rule. The public comment period was happening all spring on this, and for the most part, folks have been really supportive. It's going through the rulemaking process within DWR now that would incorporate a small change factor into dam safety rules to ensure that those dams are able to account for that increased probable maximum precipitation. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Caitlin.
All right, thanks, Taryn. So our last two speakers are water sector practitioners who will talk about mitigation and adaptation programs that they've implemented or are implementing. So next we'll hear from Curt Carson with the City of Grand Junction. Curt is a professional engineer and utility manager with 8 years of experience working in the wastewater industry. He has extensive experience in planning, construction, and operation of many innovative technologies at wastewater plants, both on the Front Range and West Slope, one of which he'll share with us today. So Curt.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to do this presentation on a case study of a really innovative approach that the City of Grand Junction has taken to be more sustainable in our treatment process on the wastewater side, and that it's having real significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. My presentation, as you can see, is called Making Vehicle Fuel Out of Sewage. Just a little bit about ourselves. You know, we're not a huge plant and we're not a small plant. We're 12.5 million gallons per day. The Persigo wastewater treatment plant is located in Grand Junction, Colorado. It's a regional facility that's owned by the city of Grand Junction and Mesa County. We serve about 85,000 population equivalents, and our current flow and loading are shown at the bottom of the screen. So we're a very conventionally sized plant that's very common in Colorado. I don't want to spend too much time talking about our treatment process because really we very much are a very normal conventional treatment plant. But the two elements of our treatment process that allow us to do what we can to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions are shown at the bottom of the slide. We have anaerobic digesters that produce biogas, and the technologies we've implemented are related to cleaning that biogas and being able to use that as a sustainable fuel source. Outside of that, it's very much a normal treatment plant that any city or county could have. The big element for us is our biogas production. So biogas, for those that aren't wastewater engineers, is essentially a byproduct of one of our treatment processes. So when we stabilize the solids that come to the plant, methane gas is produced as part of that. In this graphic, you can see the methane kind of leaving the top of what we would call an anaerobic digester. And the reason that we're able to take advantage of the greenhouse gas emissions is, according to the EPA and the renewable fuel standards, biogas produced as conversion wastewater treatment plants is considered an advanced biofuel, and biogas derived from sewage is considered carbon neutral. And the real reason that is the carbon in the biogas comes from plants that sequestered that carbon out of the atmosphere. And so really the carbon in that methane isn't coming from fossil fuels. It's already coming from the atmosphere. So it's not causing a net increase. And so that's why it's considered carbon neutral. The city of Grand Junction, when we were doing this, we do have some greater program level sustainability programs and initiatives. And really the city of Grand Junction is very interested in becoming better stewards of our natural resources and providing more economical choices, which improve the efficiency of our city facilities. I'm going to talk about one project as a case study, but I also wanted to note that as the city is looking at these sustainability issues, we really have a portfolio of approaches and tools that we're using to address these. This is just one of the efforts and projects that we're doing under our energy sustainability program. And really what we're doing, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, is we're taking the methane gas that's produced in our digesters and we're beneficially using it. We get an amazing amount of biogas 24/7, 365. And really that biogas historically has never been put to good use. The facility has been operating since the early 80s. And between the early 80s and 2015, the biogas had primarily been flared to the atmosphere. And so over that time, 84% of that biogas was flared to the atmosphere. We were getting very little environmental benefit of it. And in the time, it was really looked at as, a waste source that we had to get rid of it. And it was a byproduct of the wastewater treatment plant. The 16% that we did use, we used them in boilers on site to heat up some of our processes. And so what we did is we recognized the value of that biogas and some of the approaches that we could use to beneficially reuse it. And what we did is we pursued a technology, and it was one of the first wastewater treatment plants in the country to look at beneficially using it as a compressed natural gas. And there was really three components to it. There's a gas cleaning skid. So the raw gas coming off the digesters is not suitable for fuel. And so we have to put it through a cleaning skid to remove some of the impurities, such as hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, siloxanes, and really enrich that methane concentration. So we have a high quality fuel source for vehicle. So the first part of that is we have to have a cleaning scrubbing skid on our gas to make a good fuel. And then the next part is we have to get it to a place where we can get it in vehicles. And that involved for us building a pipeline. So coming off the gas cleaning skid, we captured all the gas coming off our digesters, put it through the cleaning skid, got it nice and clean where it wouldn't corrode or destroy engines. And then we had to put in a 5.7-mile pipeline from our facility to where the fueling stations were. And then the third step, as I kind of alluded to is the fueling station. So this is where we take that biogas and we can use it in vehicles. There's several different ways we can do that. And kind of these pictures show a combination of compression stations, some slow fill stations, some fast fill stations. And then in the lower left, that's actually a CNG station for private citizens. So if you had a CNG vehicle, you could fill up on this stuff too. So with that was all said and done, we started the process. Actually, we started the process before we had the cleaning skids built, with converting the fleet for the city of Grand Junction and the Mesa County GVT buses to a CNG fleet. And so we currently have 69 CNG fleet vehicles, and CNG stands for compressed natural gas. That's the gas we're producing here at the wastewater plant. We scrub it, put it in the pipeline, get it to the fueling station, and so these 69 vehicles are being fueled right now on the gas that's produced here. So that's pretty awesome. You know, the environmental benefits of this are huge in my mind. It's a sustainable fuel source for our community services. And at the wastewater treatment plant, you know, we're not huge and we're not small, but we're able to produce about 400 gallons of gasoline equivalent per day. That's a conversion from natural gas to what an equivalent energy of gasoline would be, called GGEs. And when you look at those GGEs for carbon reduction, it's about 19.4 pounds of CO2 per GGE. And when you look at our production times that conversion, the total carbon that is being reduced from being emitted to the atmosphere is just over 2.8 million pounds of CO2 per year. And that's just from the biogas being produced at the wastewater plant. Thinking it in another way, that's about 7,300 barrels of crude oil per year. And in one of my earlier slides, I mentioned that the biogas we produce is carbon neutral. And so really the carbon reduction is coming from, you know, we're using a carbon neutral fuel source instead of using diesel or gasoline. So that 2.8 million pounds of CO2 per year, that was what had been emitted if we stayed with diesel buses or trash trucks. And so since we got our CNG facilities up and running in 2015, we estimate that we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by just over 7.6 million pounds of CO2. We're really proud of this project. It's really kind of been a flagship for some of our sustainability and stewardship efforts at the city. And really what's happening right now is there's a lot of interest in the wastewater industry about this CNG project. And as a city, we are assisting a lot of other wastewater utilities in Colorado and actually across the country with some of their CNG projects, whether sharing operation data, sharing our experiences, or just sharing how some of it's working. So where we're at now is we're continuing to optimize our system, increase methane production. We're looking at some supply side storage so we can capture and beneficially use even more gas. And as we do these things, there will be additional CNG vehicles added to our fleet. And with that, that's all I have.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Curt. So our final panelist is Laurna Kaatz. She's the Director of Denver Water's Climate Science Policy and Adaptation Program. Her primary responsibility is to lead climate investigations and implement findings to inform planning, policy, and research. Her work incorporates many areas of water resource planning, including climate and drought planning, operational and water rights analysis, and long-range integrated resource planning. She's also the chair of the Water Utility Climate Alliance. So, Laurna, are you all set? Did you receive the invitation to be a presenter?
Can you see my slides?
No.
Then no. You want to take it off of me and put it back on?
Maybe I will do that. There we go.
All right, great. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to be brief since I spent 30 seconds trying to get my slides up. I'm Laurna Kaatz with Denver Water, and Denver Water is the largest drinking water utility in the state of Colorado. We serve a quarter of the state's population, and our service area, you can see, is in this teal area. Within our service area are about 1 million jobs, and we produce 30% of the state's GDP, and we have incredibly efficient customers. Of all the water consumed in the state, less than 2% is consumed by our community. Denver Water is in the headwaters of the semi-arid region with snowpack-driven watersheds. And we are incredibly vulnerable to climate warming. As we already talked about with Brad and with Taryn, we know that warming is here and now. It's no longer the next generation's challenge. It's right here for us to deal with. And we could see significant reductions in supply from warming alone. So we've done some simple analysis to look at just 5-degree warming, and we've already warmed to 2.5 degrees across our state and in our watersheds. So we could reduce supply 20%, which is 1/5 of our supply lost only because of warming. Precipitation would need to increase significantly in order to offset any warming. And if we get warming, which we're committed to have, then if we only warm a little bit and our winters get wetter, we still are going to see reduced supply. If we warm a lot and daily variability significantly increases, our supply will also be reduced. So in summary, we're significantly vulnerable to warming. And we know climate change is a risk enhancer. Part of what we do as water utilities is we mitigate risk. So we are already working on droughts and fires and floods and vegetational changes. So these are anticipated to increase in intensity, duration, and frequency. And new challenges are also going to start to pop up. So for Denver Water, it's our vision to become the best water utility in the nation. So for the last 100 years, it's been our responsibility to sustain the growth, the development, economic, and physical health of the Denver area, and to be good partners with the 12 counties in which we operate in. So sustainability is a part of everything that we do. But sustainability involves more than just developing and maintaining our water supplies. We need to be innovative, we need to be resilient and adaptable in the face of all the changes that we're starting to experience and the ones that are going to be coming to fruition. And as part of that, and part of this need to be prepared, we're taking climate mitigation very seriously. So climate mitigation is one of our most important climate adaptation strategies. So one program I want to highlight before I dive into our sustainability program is our From Forest to Faucets partnership. So we've partnered with the state and U.S. Forest Service for several years. And because we rely on snowmelt for our water supply, our forests and watersheds are critical parts of our infrastructure. So to date, we've treated more than 100,000 acres of forest. So we've treated them by restoring the livelihood of the forest, as well as reducing fuels, transplanting trees, doing prescribed burnings and whatnot. So a good example of this is here on the screen where we're comparing the Buffalo Peak watershed for 2007 versus 2013. You can see the comparison of a less healthy watershed in 2007 to a very vibrant and healthy watershed in 2013. And in 2018, this watershed burned. And, you know, our mitigation efforts are not going to stop burns from happening. We're just hoping that burns aren't going to be completely catastrophic. And you can see the burn in 2018 went right up to the housing line, which was great. It stopped there. And we estimated that we saved, through our mitigation efforts at this watershed, we saved over $1 billion worth of property and infrastructure damages. So in 2018, we completed our first sustainability plan, and this is really in line with what our mission has always been, to be responsible stewards of our resources, our assets, and our natural environment. And we repeat this message in our sustainability plan, where we take the responsibility very seriously of being good and smart stewards of our environment. So a few things I'm going to highlight out of this plan include our greenhouse gas work, because mitigation is one of our primary climate adaptation strategies. I'm going to note our work on waste management, and then the procedures and processes we're putting in place for our new building. So we've developed our sustainability plan, and we have a whole bunch of goals in that plan, but specifically related to greenhouse gases is our goal to decrease organization-wide greenhouse gases by 15% in comparison to our 2050 baseline by 2020. We also have a goal to be energy neutral with respect to our electricity and natural gas units by 2020. And we're on our way to meeting both of those goals. We have additional commitments that we're making on energy and transportation. So for example, we're trying to do all renovations are going to have better lighting, LEDs, different HVAC systems, things that are more efficient. We've put in software for our vehicles, so it notes when something's idling, so we can change that behavior and make sure we are driving at speed limits that result in fuel efficiency. And then we're also always looking for renewable energy opportunities throughout our systems and our facilities, and this includes our watershed. So we started doing our greenhouse gas inventory in 2008. You can see how that was a pretty high year for us, and we've really tapered down right after that year. And part of this is just tracking to see where we are, and it also allows us to see where we want to be in meeting our 2020 goal. So we feel that we are on our way to meeting that goal, especially with 2017 being below the goal that we had set. So speaking of energy, I want to note all the things that we're working on with hydropower. Across our facilities, we have 7 hydropower plants in operation, and we design new hydroelectric in our upcoming treatment plants that we're building. And then we have several open channel hydro power pilots. So that's what's on the slide right now is an example of one of our hydropower pilots. So we're installing 10 pilots throughout our system. And the goal is to see how effective these pilots are, and they're supposed to be able to supply energy for 7 or 8 single families for a full year. So we're piloting this. It's being tracked by the energy and water communities, and obviously there's some great opportunities for national and international applications. So, just to note, Reclamation manages over 8,000 miles of irrigated canals. So there's lots of opportunities across our country if this is a successful project. So the next thing I wanted to highlight is the work that we've done on benchmarking and curbing our waste. So this is an example of how we're highlighting what we're doing, but in 2016, 2017, we really took our recycling program to a new level, our waste recycling within our staff, within our buildings, and then we've started composting as well. So to highlight what we're doing, we have, we highlight our stats. So we show what we've recycled. So in April, our larger facilities, we recycled 7,000 pounds, composted 4,000 pounds, and then we translate that into what we're conserving. So our oil conserved, the trees saved, emissions avoided, how energy can go to powering homes, the water we're saving, and the trash that we're keeping out of the landfills. So part of what we're doing here is obviously benchmarking, tracking, but we're also trying to highlight the value of what we're doing. So it increases employee interest, and it lets them see the bigger picture. Of course, we have a lot of environmental management, environmental compliance activities that we're involved in, and we're always trying to go a little bit above and beyond what we're required to do. So this is a look at our treatment plants, what we achieved in the 2016-2017 year. You can see, we saved an equivalent of 6.7 million 100-watt light bulbs, over 100 million gallons of water, 700 pounds of hazardous waste were eliminated, and we had almost 3,000 pounds of single stream recycling. So really cool things that we're able to see in the work that we're doing. So the last thing that I want to take a few minutes to highlight is our operations complex redevelopment. So this is our new OCR. This redevelopment is taking place in our administration headquarters. And it includes our shops, our equipment shops, our fleet, our maintenance, our warehouses, our trade buildings, and it also has a lot of storage on this campus for pipes and materials. But we're redeveloping it because our campus was outdated, it was inefficient, and it was inadequate to meet future demands of running a water utility. So our goal is to build a site that's modern, that improves our efficiency, our functionality, our resilience, our security, and safety across all of our operations. So of course, sustainability is a key factor in all of this. We're designing these buildings for LEED certification, and I'll talk about more about that in a minute. We're going to have educational demonstration areas that showcases our net zero energy and our leading edge concepts, such as One Water that we're going to have on campus. And I think that's it for this slide. So we are highlighting what we're planning to do with this campus in, kind of nifty ways that look smart and kind of fun to look at, but I'm going to walk you through this a little bit. So with respect to lights, we're going to have a lot of daylight coming in, so 104 skylights and panels. So we're reducing the amount of electrical lights we're going to be using. Rather, we're going to have a lot of daylit. So 85% of our space is going to be daylit. And then we're going to have several LED lights throughout our building. So we're installing this for energy efficiency purposes. Energy, we're going to have photovoltaic on this campus, and it's already being set up, and it's pretty exciting. But we're also going to be setting up monitoring systems so that if there's not activity going on in a building, lights will go out. So, it's monitored, and we're increasing our energy efficiency. But another cool thing that we're putting in place is called CUP, which is Central Utility Plant, so CUP. And this is basically radiant heating and cooling through the floors and ceilings across 4 of our buildings. So we're really excited about this. So we'll be using radiant heating instead of forced air. So with respect to water, we're going to have 4 stormwater and flood control basins on our campus. And we're setting ourselves up to reduce our water use that we currently have right now by 50% with higher efficiency irrigation practices and xeric landscaping. And again, this is going to be an educational area for people to come in and see what we've done. And one of the things that is most notable is that we're going to reduce our potable water use by 228% with our One Water systems. So this is something we're really excited about. We're really trying to lead by example with respect to One Water and walk the talk. And we're working with CDPHE to get some regulations in place so we can bring One Water to our campus. A couple other things to highlight is, just going through this process, there's contaminated soil that we've been able to replace. And then, of course, as I noted at the beginning, we're going to be getting LEED certifications for our buildings. And at first, we only thought we were going to get 4 facilities certified, but it turns out we're meeting LEED certification for all the buildings on this campus to various degrees, but it's pretty exciting. Okay, so a couple of things I want to highlight before I turn it back over. We use green bonds to fund our OCR, so the redevelopment of our new campus. So we released those in 2017. The investors are really excited about this. People are seeking to invest in projects that are sustainably focused, and they're seeking to support organizations that are working on climate adaptation. So people were excited to invest in our bonds. We're seeking ways to change our operations. So for example, we want to conserve energy. So that's one of our goals as an organization. So we've changed how we operate our recycling plant, and now we're only operating during the day. to be more energy conscientious. And then we're providing things to our employees, such as eco passes. We also encourage people to do bike to work day and carpool with others. And so the reason I highlighted these 3 areas is I just wanted to depict the stance of activities that we're working on in our sustainability program. So that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to you, Caitlin.
All right, thanks, Lorna. So now we'll turn back to our panelists to answer some questions. It looks like we have a couple coming in already, but if you happen to join us late and want to pose a question, just use the questions section of the GoToWebinar dashboard, which is probably somewhere on the side of your screen. So there you can type your question in, and then I'll read them aloud so our panelists can respond. So the first question is for Lorna and Denver Water. It asks, can you explain the One Water concept a little more and how that can be applied to a private company or campus?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So One Water is just a holistic look at using water. So it's, you know, saying we should connect water. Water needs to be connected, and we need to reuse when we can reuse. So for example, water used for washing your hands can be, you know, used to flush your toilets. Water used for washing your hands can potentially be used for watering the plants outside. So it's this whole idea of using water more than once before it goes through your system. And in Colorado, this is a pretty significant challenge because of our water rights system. You can use water once, and then someone else owns the use of that water downstream. So it's been an exciting and significantly challenging quest for us to bring these One Water opportunities to campus. So, you know, I think for organizations throughout Colorado, we're trying to set the stage for others to be able to do this. You know, in some cases, you're going to have to augment the water that's being reused on your campus with other water supplies. But in many cases, there's opportunities for win-wins where you can build One Water solutions at your facility where you're not having implications downstream. So it's a big dialogue. It's a challenging dialogue, but we're really hoping that we're going to set the stage for others throughout the state to be able to do some similar things. So I think it's going to be practical and applicable to private utilities or private organizations throughout our state.
Thanks. So we have another related question. How is Denver Water reducing their on-site potable use by more than 100%?
Yeah. So this is, again, we're decreasing our potable use by increasing our reuse. So we're going to have reuse on campus. So instead of using potable water for toilet flushing and potable water for outdoor ground watering uses, we're going to be using reused water for those purposes. So that's how we're getting to above 100%.
Perfect. For Curt, how does the savings for vehicle fuel compare to the costs of installing the CNG systems?
So to repeat the question, so how does the savings from vehicle fuel cost compared to the cost of the system?
Yes.
The payback period on the whole system, when we looked at the capital, the expenses, and the revenues, came to about just under 9 years. And so we are able to produce a net revenue that's very significant, on the order of hundreds of thousands a year. And we actually get revenue from several sources. We get revenues from the direct sale of the gas to the end user. We get significant savings from the price difference between the CNG and what diesel costs. And then there's a program through EPA called the Renewable Fuel Standards. And there's something called RIN credits, stands for Renewable Identification Numbers. We sell those to petroleum producers, and so we get revenue from that also. The operating expense of the system is relatively cheap, and so at the end of the year, when everything's all set up, we're looking at several $100,000s a year in net positive revenue, and that is translated into a payoff period of I think it's 8 years right now is what we're looking at. So the economic side, I didn't talk about it in the presentation, but the economics of the CNG have been very, very favorable for us on a lot of fronts.
Wow, great. So Laurna and Curt, are your utilities connected to municipal and city leadership discussions on decarbonization or net zero emissions, or any connection to the mayor's office and other initiatives?
I'll take the first crack at it. So the city of Grand Junction and our utility specifically is connected through city leadership and our city council on directives that they've set. One of the things I mentioned in my presentation was some of the sustainability programs that the city has taken on, and a lot of those did come kind of be initiated and supported from city leadership, city council, and even our joint Persigo board level. So we're very much in alignment with our day-to-day operations and decisions we make, and how that's furthering the sustainability goals of the city and the county.
Yeah, we're similarly aligned. We're not part of the city and county of Denver. Our board is appointed by the mayor, but we're separate organizations, and we have separate funding. So it's a little bit different on how we work together, but we do our best to stay connected. And so we were specifically part of their mitigation work that the city did over the last several years. And we helped them with their climate vulnerability analysis they did, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago. So we try to stay connected, making sure that our programs are additive and supportive of each other, and that they're not conflicting in any way. So, we meet on a pretty regular basis to stay connected and make sure we know what's going on with the other organization, and we do our best to really stay aligned.
Now we have a question for Taryn. Does the 1.07% multiplier in PMF calculation apply regardless of altitude?
I don't know the answer to that. It is dependent upon the dam safety rules and how your dam falls under those safety rules. So there's different rules for different dams based on risk and so forth. And I believe that it applied across the board, but I can connect you with Bill McCormick, who can give you a more detailed answer on that.
Okay. Do any of our panelists have thoughts on any bigger picture opportunities for other water providers or wastewater treatment plants, like the biggest picture things that other folks could be doing to take advantage of programs that are similar to yours?
Could you repeat the beginning of that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, are there any big picture opportunities that other water providers or wastewater providers could be doing to take advantage of other mitigation programs like yours?
Mm-hmm. So I was just reading Civil Engineering, the June issue, has a whole showcase on net zero opportunities. So, there's lots of resources out there. There's lots of articles that you can read. There's a ton of utilities who are leading the way, so the big cities, Portland, Seattle, New York, Denver's doing a great job. So I think there's lots of things we can learn from each other. But, as quick wins, for us, one of the biggest, the most beneficial things that we've done is starting to benchmark where we are. So just understanding how much energy we're using, understanding what our waste looks like, understanding what our portfolio is right now. So really getting to know your current state that's critical to be able to figuring out what you might change and then monitoring how that would change over time. So I think that's one of the most important first steps.
Great, thank you. Do any of our panelists have any closing thoughts?
I guess I could chime in again. So Brad noted that there is an opportunity for us to be leaders on climate mitigation. And, you know, I see folks in water as being the canaries in the coal mine with respect to climate impacts. We're already feeling the impacts of climate change. We're going to continue to feel the impacts of climate change, and our business is going to be directly impacted. So I feel strongly that we should be a leader on climate mitigation. The more we can do to mitigate these changes from happening, the better off we're all going to be.
Well said, Laurna.
All right, well, thank you all. Thanks to our presenters and thanks to everyone who is in the audience for participating and asking your questions. Again, Water Education Colorado encourages you to take the next step by reading more, contacting our panelists, communicating with each other, learning from each other. You can find us online at watereducationcolorado.org. And I will follow up with everyone with a recording of the webinar and any other resources. So thank you all, and this concludes our webinar.